Today we're going to dissect the new CPA 120-hour competency-based experience pathway. This is from the AICPA and NASBA recently released exposure draft about the possibility of this new 120-hour pathway to the CPA. We're going to go over 4 key points today. We're going to talk about the change overview, the reasoning behind it, the key details of the change and how this new pathway works. And also we're going to talk about the potential effects and really interesting effects on the future of the accounting pipeline. Point number 1, the change overview. What does this mean? The current pathway to get your CPA involves getting 150 credit hours in higher education. You can either do that currently through a master's degree to get your extra 30 credits or your 5th year, or you can take 30 credits outside of a master's program, just taking additional classes. This new change that's being proposed will now allow you to become a CPA with only 120 hours from your bachelor's degree. Instead, those extra 30 hours are going to be replaced with a competence-based experience pathway. We'll get into what that is in just a second. Why are they proposing this change and reducing the 150 hours to 120 hours for this new pathway? It really all comes down to the accounting pipeline. I'm sure that you've heard about it, and I'm sure that you are probably tired of hearing about it, the accounting pipeline shortage, due to several factors, right? An aging CPA workforce, decrease in accounting graduates, decrease in CPA exam candidates. Some of this could be attributed, right, to the 150 credit barrier. This wasn't always the case, right? This was introduced by the AICPA in around 1988. And then it wasn't adopted by all states and all jurisdictions until early 2000s. But this required, right, a whole extra year of school. That's a cost barrier. That's a little bit of a deterrent, right, if you had just finished your bachelor's and might be ready to just get on with your career. What are the key details and how is this new pathway going to work? There are 4 steps that are required, like we saw on one of the first slides, to get your CPA. You first need the bachelor's degree. This stays the same. The second part here is what changes. Instead of the additional 30 hours through master's or extra classes, now you can substitute that with a competency-based experience. And we'll dive into great detail what those steps are and what you need to do to satisfy that requirement. The third step is the general experience. The AICPA requires at least 1 year of general experience. Some jurisdictions like Indiana, where I'm licensed, require 2 years. So depending on your state, the general experience will not change. If you do competency-based experience, you are still required to do the general experience. And then the fourth part is the CPA exam. That is not going to change outside of normal exam changes. Now let's dive into the competency-based experience. This excerpt comes directly from the AICPA exposure draft, and it says, competency-based experience may consist of providing any type of service or advice using accounting, attestation, compilation, management advisory, financial advisory, tax, or consulting skills. This first reads kind of like similar vibes from the general experience requirement. Acceptable experience includes employment or volunteer work in industry, government, academia, or public practice. So you can get it in a variety of ways. You don't necessarily have to go to a public accounting to get this experience. And the requirement is 1 year or 2,000 hours of competency-based experience. That's what you need to satisfy this requirement. So if you take a step back and think about it, the extra 30 credits to get 150 credits took about an extra year. And so to substitute that, now we're just using 1 year of experience. So with this new pathway, you really can't get your CPA any faster. It's just substituting an extra year of education for a year of on-the-job education or on-the-job experience. And I think that's the idea here. If you don't want to pay that cost for your master's degree, it can be very expensive. If you don't want to shell out money for extra credits to get the 30 credits, this might be your alternative. Instead of paying tuition to get that master's, now you can satisfy the requirement by getting paid in your professional job that you already were going to start anyway. One thing to note here is that internships do not count towards the competency-based experience. Currently, internships are allowed to be counted for the general experience requirement. And finally, the combined competency-based experience and general experience will be 2 years. So this is a good point. You cannot count both types of experience concurrently. You cannot do 1 year of experience and count it for competency-based experience and count it for general experience. Kind of like we said earlier, it still takes the same amount of time to get the CPA. You have to do each 1 year at a time. The exposure draft does say that if the competency-based experience takes you longer than 1 year, so say it takes you 2 years to develop those competencies and to get your CPA evaluator to sign off on those to feel really comfortable with your competencies, then the second of that 2 years could count towards your general experience requirement, but you can't do them completely concurrently, all in 1 year. So what is the competency-based experience, this idea that we've just been talking about? What do you actually have to do to satisfy this requirement? Candidates must obtain all 7 of the following professional competencies: ethical behavior, critical thinking and professional skepticism, communication, collaboration, teamwork, and leadership, self-management and continuous learning, business acumen, and technology mindset. Now, you aren't just left on your own here with the titles of these competencies. The exposure draft does include specific, detailed frameworks and examples of how these competencies could be satisfied. So there is criteria that you will measure candidates against if you are a CPA evaluator. In addition to the 7 professional competencies, you must also obtain 1 of the 3 technical competencies. Think about this as a specialized area. These areas are audit and assurance, tax, and business and financial reporting. So again, to summarize, you need to obtain all 7 professional competencies, display these competencies, and you must also obtain 1 technical competency of the following 3 on the right. So how are your competencies certified? You certainly aren't doing this yourself if you're a CPA candidate. And the process is going to be very similar to your general experience requirements. It's going to be certified by a current CPA. They will evaluate you based on a form that's provided by the AICPA, and we'll take a quick look at it from the exposure draft in its current form. It is a note that the CPA evaluator needs to be a licensed CPA in good standing with a minimum of 3 years post-licensure experience. So they can't be fresh with their license. The CPA evaluator should be the candidate's employer or supervisor, similar to how the general experience requirement is certified. Below here, you'll see a picture of the evaluation key. For each competency, the evaluator simply marks yes and no. Now, it's good to note that the CPA evaluator needs to do their due diligence, responsibly evaluate each candidate, but it is a simple yes or no answer on whether they've satisfied the competency. You can also say not applicable if the evaluator was not part of that competency, and you could have multiple evaluators to fill all of your competencies if needed. For the professional competencies, you'll see the form here from the AICPA exposure draft. It's a little small. If you want to look at it in more detail, it is in the description. It lists each competency and a brief description. Again, there is much more detailed criteria available in the exposure draft, but just a brief description for the evaluation form, and then yes, no, or not applicable. For the technical competencies, it looks very similar. You get the 3 technical competencies and a brief description and whether yes, this was met, no, it wasn't, or not applicable. This is a good time to note that this new CPA pathway is only in its exposure draft. So this is not currently available to pursue at the moment. Comments for the exposure draft are available through December. And then after that, there may be changes to the draft and changes to the rule before it's put up for its final version. One other thing to note too is that even if the AICPA and NASBA approves this, it does require approval by each state accountancy board. So that means that even if this is approved, each state has to approve this and put it into legislation. And one example I include here at the bottom refers back to the 150-hour requirement. The AICPA and NASBA approved that in 1988, and it took about 20 years for each state to adopt that. And right, some did it earlier and some were on board right away and others weren't. So again, it could take some time for this to get approved in your state. I would say, given the accounting pipeline shortage right now, I could see many states being on board with this and signing into it very quickly. The fourth point we'll talk about here are potential effects. Where is this going to lead for the accounting profession? The first point I want to talk about, I think this is going to be a very, very popular pathway to become a CPA. It eliminates a huge cost barrier and cost hurdle to becoming a CPA if you don't want to do your master's degree or you can't afford to. I think a lot of students will take advantage of this, being able to earn income while satisfying that extra 30 hours, if you will. The second point, I think we will see a decrease in the number of students pursuing the master's in accounting degree, right? It was very convenient, like me when I was in school and pursuing my CPA. It was very convenient if you were already in college, you needed your extra 30 hours anyway, you might as well take the master's of accounting that your school offered. I incurred, some student loans from that. I had to pay for that. It's expensive. So I think with this option to work and earn your CPA in the same amount of time, I think we'll see enrollment in Masters of Accounting programs decline. And the third point, again, like I mentioned on the previous slide, I think we would see relatively fast adoption by the state boards of accountancy in each state. I really think to address this shortage and the pipeline issue, this is something that would really help and really boost enrollment and candidates taking the CPA exam. One other door that this opens to is individuals or people in the workforce who didn't necessarily think about getting their CPA right away. My wife, Maria, was an accounting major as well, but she was absolutely done with accounting and school at the end of her 4 years when she got her bachelor's. So she entered the workforce immediately, did managerial accounting, did some bookkeeping, but she was working under active CPAs. At that time, since she didn't have 150 credit hours, she had no opportunity to get her CPA unless she had gone back to school for an extra year, which once you're out of school is very difficult to do. If this proposed rule were going to effect, my wife Maria could effectively start pursuing the CPA again without going back to school. She would still need to pass the CPA exam, but she wouldn't have to jump over that huge hurdle of going back to school and getting 150 credit hours. I hope that this explanation was helpful and provided a little bit more insight into this new proposed rule by the AICPA and NASBA. If you have any questions, if you have any comments, please leave them below. Let me know what you think about this rule. If you're in higher education, if you are in the field, if you're a student, please let me know what you think about this below, as it will have a big effect on the future of the accounting profession. Thanks again.